Welcome to Catch This. My name is Trudy Ray. One of the most noteworthy advances in biomedical science is the vaccine for human papillomavirus, or HPV. This vaccine has significantly changed the diagnostic and prognostic landscape in the field of cervical cancer. Cervical cancer is the fourth most common cancer in women globally, and it is a particular problem in low-income countries and for women living with HIV. Since the FDA approved the initial HPV vaccine in 2006, the incidence of cervical cancer is substantially lower among individuals who were immunized before age 14. In this video, I will briefly cover the existing HPV vaccines and the scientific evidence that demonstrates their success. Don't go away. German virologist Harald Surhausen initially made the connection between HPV and cervical cancer in the early 1980s, when he isolated and identified HPV type 16 and HPV type 18 from cervical cancer tumors. Subsequent research showed that 99% of cervical cancer cases are linked to prior infection with HPV, and that HPV 16 and 18 are responsible for the majority of these cases. Surhausen's findings provided the foundation for the development of all HPV vaccines, and he was awarded the 2008 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for his discoveries. There are currently 6 licensed HPV vaccines sold under the trade names Cervarix, Sokolin, Walrenvax, Cervavax, Gardasil, and Gardasil 9. Cervarix, Sokolin, and Walrenvax are bivalent formulations that protect against HPV 16 and 18. Cervavax and Gardasil are quadrivalent vaccines that also protect against HPV 6 and 11 in addition to 16 and 18. Gardasil 9 is the only HPV vaccine used in the US, and as its name implies, it protects against 9 strains: HPV 6, 11, 16, 18, 31, 33, 45, 52, and 58. That's impressive. And why these 9 strains? Because these are the main HPV types associated with cervical cancer tumors. All HPV vaccines consist of hollow virus-like particles lacking viral DNA and are composed of recombinant inactivated L1, the main structural capsid protein of HPV. For example, Gardasil 9 contains inactive L1 proteins from each of the 9 different HPV strains listed here. The vaccines are designed to stimulate production of antibodies that neutralize the respective HPV viruses, so this prevents infection with any of the HPV strains in the vaccines. Since the original HPV vaccines were introduced, their effectiveness in preventing HPV disease and cervical cancer has been documented extensively. To demonstrate this effectiveness, I want to briefly summarize 3 reports published in the last year or so. The first report, a retrospective study based on routinely collected data on all women in Scotland born between 1988 and 2016, showed that the bivalent vaccine Cervarix dramatically reduced and prevented the incidence of invasive cervical cancer. There was not a single recorded case of invasive cervical cancer in the 40,503 women who had been immunized at age 12 or 13, regardless of how many doses they had been given. And the 99,516 women who received 3 doses between age 14 and 22 were significantly less likely to develop cancer compared to all unvaccinated women. These results suggest that vaccination of girls at the recommended age of 11 provides complete protection against cervical cancer. Why am I so confident about this? One of the criteria that I look for in clinical trials or retrospective studies like this is the number of participants. The bigger the number, the better. In the second report, the investigators of a population-based study in Texas analyzed data from the local immunization registry and various other epidemiological databases, which collectively involved more than 54.7 million participants in different Texas counties between 2006 and 2022. They found that there was a higher prevalence of HPV-related cervical cancer in counties in North Texas, where there was reduced HPV vaccine availability and a lower rate of vaccination compared to counties with higher vaccine uptake. These data suggest that HPV vaccination has a real positive impact on disease outcome in immunized individuals. The third report, a more recent nationwide epidemiological survey evaluating the cervical cancer mortality rates in U.S. women between 1992 and 2021, showed that there was a 12% per year decline in cervical cancer incidence between 2012 and 2019, representing an overall 65% reduction in cervical cancer. Taken together, these studies clearly illustrate the long-term effectiveness of the HPV vaccines in preventing cervical cancer in multiple different populations and settings. Although HPV vaccination was initially only recommended for girls and young women, it quickly became evident that vaccinating boys would automatically also protect the girls with whom they come in contact. Not only that, but the HPV vaccine also prevents anal, penile, and head and neck cancers in addition to cervical cancer. So this further supports the notion that both boys and girls should be vaccinated. Some people are concerned that HPV vaccination may encourage earlier and risky sexual behavior in young vaccine recipients. But these concerns are unwarranted. And why do I say that? Again, I like to look at the data, the evidence. Multiple studies indicate that there is no association between HPV vaccination status and subsequent sexual activity. Young girls in particular appear to be aware of their risk of acquiring other non-HPV related STDs, and they believe that safe sex behaviors like condom use are still necessary even after vaccination against HPV. There is also no evidence to suggest that HPV vaccination causes young vaccine recipients to engage in sex earlier than they would if they were not vaccinated. In other words, the evidence is strongly in favor of immunizing both boys and girls with the HPV vaccine during their early teens, ideally by age 11, in order to prevent cervical cancer and other cancers caused by HPV. That's it for today. Thanks again for listening. My name is Trudy Ray, and I will see you next time on Catch This.